He was shouting the same phrase, over and over again, with genuine terror. Airplane crash, plane on fire, little man can't get out. And then she began to speak. She described every figure. She named the gods. She recited the hieroglyphic prayers written above them. If there was money inside, the case was closed. They opened the lid. It was empty. A murmur of disappointment ran through the room. Today, we are not looking for ghosts. We are looking for data. Neuroscience tells us that memory is biological. It is stored in the neurons of our brain. When the brain dies, our memories, our personality, and our secrets die with it. That is the scientific rule. But there are anomalies. Cases where a subject possesses specific, verifiable technical knowledge from a time before they were born. Today, we are not looking for ghosts. We are looking for data. We are going to audit the memories of 3 children to see if consciousness can survive the physical death of the body. File number 1, the pilot. To understand this case, we must first understand the family. The year is 2000. The place is Lafayette, Louisiana. Bruce and Andrea Leininger were living a quiet, structured life. Bruce was a corporate executive in the oil industry. Andrea was a homemaker. They were devout Christians. In their house, the Bible was the ultimate authority. The concept of reincarnation wasn't just foreign to them. It was structurally impossible within their worldview. But shortly after his 2nd birthday, their son James began to change. It didn't start with a story. It started with a sound. At 2 years old, James began having violent, repetitive nightmares. 4 or 5 times a week, the house would be woken up by a blood-curdling scream. When Bruce and Andrea rushed into his bedroom, they witnessed a disturbing scene. James wasn't crying for his mother. He was lying flat on his back, thrashing violently. His legs were kicking upward at the ceiling, fighting against the air, as if he were trapped inside a small, burning box and was trying to kick the canopy open to escape. His screams were specific. He wasn't babbling. He was shouting the same phrase, over and over again, with genuine terror. Airplane crash, plane on fire, little man can't get out. Imagine the horror of a parent watching their toddler relive a violent death, night after night. During the day, the behavior became even stranger. James developed an obsession with airplanes, but he didn't play with them. He executed them. He would take his toy planes and slam them nose first into the coffee table, smashing the propellers. He did this for hours. Andrea Leininger was worried. She asked her mother, "Is he traumatized? Did he see something on the news?" But James watched only children's cartoons. There was no source for this violence. Then came the day the anomaly moved from emotional to technical. Andrea took James to a toy store to buy him a treat. They were looking at a bin of plastic airplanes. Andrea picked one up to show him. She pointed to a small, shiny object attached to the bottom of the plane. Trying to engage her son, she said, "Look, James, it even has a bomb on the bottom." The 2-year-old boy stopped her. He didn't laugh. He looked at his mother with a rigid, annoyed expression, the expression of a professional correcting an amateur. He said, "No, Mommy, that's not a bomb. That's a drop tank." Andrea froze. She looked at the toy. She looked at her son. A drop tank is a jettisonable external fuel tank used by military aircraft to extend their flight range. It is a highly specific aviation term. It is not a word you hear on Barney or Teletubbies. James had never been to an airport. He had never read a war book. Yet he knew the difference between a weapon and a fuel system. For Andrea, this was just a weird moment. But when she told her husband, Bruce felt a cold shiver of suspicion. He realized that his son wasn't just having bad dreams. He was remembering details. And if he knew about drop tanks, what else did he know? Bruce Leininger decided to treat this like a cold case investigation. He assumed his son was repeating something he heard elsewhere. He decided to interrogate the witness. One evening, while James was playing quietly, Bruce approached him. He didn't lead the witness. He asked open-ended questions. "James, what happened to your plane?" James replied instantly, "It crashed on fire." Bruce asked, "Why did it crash?" James said, "The Japanese shot it." Then Bruce asked the critical question, "Where did your plane take off from?" A 2-year-old child in Louisiana should have said, "The airport," or "the sky." Instead, James said one strange, specific word, "Natoma." Bruce wrote it down. He searched the naval archives, and what he found made his skepticism waver. There was a ship called the USS Natoma Bay. It wasn't a famous carrier like the Enterprise. It was a small escort carrier, a baby flat top, stationed in the Pacific in 1945. It was obscure. There were no documentaries about it on TV. But Bruce found a contradiction. James insisted he flew a Corsair. The records showed that the Natoma Bay carried mostly FM-2 Wildcats. Bruce thought, "Aha, I caught him. He's mixing up names." But then James mentioned a specific mechanical detail. He told his father that he hated the Corsair because they used to get flat tires all the time. Let's pause and look at the engineering of the Vought F4U Corsair to understand what the boy meant. The Corsair was built for speed, with a massive engine and a long nose that blocked the pilot's view. But its fatal flaw was the landing gear. The plane used oleo struts, shock absorbers filled with pressurized oil and air. In the 1940s, these struts were tuned extremely stiff. When a pilot tried to land on a pitching carrier deck, the stiff struts wouldn't absorb the impact. They would reject it. The plane would bounce violently. To a pilot inside the cockpit, this jarring, bone-rattling bounce felt exactly like driving a car with a blown-out tire. The plane would wobble, lurch, and often flip over. Historians confirm that carrier pilots hated the Corsair for this exact reason. Flat tires was not a toddler's fantasy. It was a pilot's slang for a specific suspension failure known as the Corsair bounce. Bruce realized his son wasn't lying. He was remembering physics. He went back to the maps. James had mentioned a specific location for his death. Not just the ocean, but a place near a volcano. Bruce pulled the mission logs for the Natoma Bay. On March 3, 1945, the squadron launched a strike not on Iwo Jima, but on a nearby island called Chichijima. The mission was to bomb radio towers in a heavily defended harbor. The action report reads, "Pilot hit by anti-aircraft fire in the engine. Aircraft rolled over, caught fire, and crashed into the harbor." The details matched James's nightmare perfectly, but Bruce needed a name. He asked his son, "Who was the little man?" James said, "Me." Bruce asked, "Did you have friends?" James looked up and said, "Jack Larson." Bruce expected to find a Jack Larson on a memorial wall. Instead, he found a phone number in Arkansas. Jack Larson was real. He had served on the Natoma Bay, and he was still alive. Bruce Leininger tracked down Jack Larson. The old veteran confirmed everything. Yes, he flew on the Natoma Bay. Yes, he knew James Houston. And yes, Houston was the only pilot shot down during the Chichijima raid, exactly as the boy described. But for Bruce, one question remained. Why did James mention the names Billy, Leon, and Walter? James had 3 G.I. Joe action figures that he played with constantly. He had named them Billy, Leon, and Walter. When Bruce asked him why, the 2-year-old gave a chilling answer. "Because that's who met me when I got to heaven." Bruce returned to the squadron archives of VC-81. He pulled the casualty list for the USS Natoma Bay. He scanned the names of the 21 men killed during the deployment, and there they were. Billy Peeler, Leon Connor, Walter Devlin, Bruce froze. These were not random names. These were 3 pilots from the same small unit. And here is the detail that defies probability. All 3 of them died before James Houston. Billy Peeler died on Iwo Jima. Leon Connor and Walter Devlin were killed in earlier raids. If James Houston died in March, then technically, these 3 men were already dead. In the boy's narrative, they were indeed the welcome committee waiting for him on the other side. The probability of a toddler randomly guessing the correct first names of 3 servicemen from the same obscure squadron is statistical 0. But the Leiningers needed one final verification. They needed someone who knew the pilot intimately. They tracked down Ann Barron, James Houston's elderly sister, living in California. She was 84 years old. Ann was a skeptic. She had mourned her brother for 50 years, but she agreed to speak with the child. James began to tell her things that were not in any military record. He told her about their father and how he was an alcoholic who smashed things in rage. He told her about a portrait of her that their mother had painted when they were children, a portrait that had been hidden in an attic for decades. Ann Barron wept. The secrets of a broken family are not written in history books. They are only written in memory. She sent James a package containing her brother's personal effects, his pilot's wings, his photos, and a Corsair model. She said, "The child was so convincing. There is no way in the world he could know these things." In 2003, the Leininger family traveled to the coast of Japan, near the spot where the plane went down. James stood on the deck of a boat. He held a bouquet of white flowers. He threw them into the dark water of the Pacific Ocean. He said, "Goodbye, James." After that day, the nightmares stopped. The screaming stopped. The pilot had finally come home. Neuroscience says memory dies with the brain. But the case of James Leininger suggests that some memories are too heavy to be erased by death. Let's leave the Pacific Ocean and travel back in time. The year is 1904. The place is London. It was a typical Edwardian winter, cold, damp, and choked with thick fog. In a respectable house in a London suburb, a tragedy occurred that would defy medical explanation. A 3-year-old girl named Dorothy Eady was running on the 2nd floor of her parents' home. She slipped and fell down a steep flight of wooden stairs. When the family doctor arrived, the scene was grim. The little girl was lying at the bottom of the steps, motionless. The doctor checked her pulse. There was none. He held a mirror to her lips to check for breath. The glass remained clear. He turned to her grieving parents and pronounced the words no parent ever wants to hear. "I'm sorry. She is dead." The doctor asked the nurse to prepare the body and left the room to fill out the death certificate. But an hour later, when he returned to the room, he found something impossible. Little Dorothy was sitting up in her bed. She was playing. She was alive. Her parents were overjoyed. They called it a miracle. But as the days passed, they realized that the little girl who woke up was not the same girl who fell down. Dorothy began to speak with a strange accent, a foreign intonation that didn't match her British upbringing. She became withdrawn. She refused to play with other children. She would sit by the window for hours, staring at the gray English sky, crying and pleading with her mother. "I want to go home. Take me home." Her mother would say, "But Dorothy, you are home. Look, here is your room. Here is your bed." And Dorothy would shake her head and point far away. "No, not this home. My real home. Where the trees are. Where the columns are." Her parents feared she had suffered brain damage. They took her to specialists, but physically, she was fine. Then, mostly to distract her, they took her on a Sunday trip to the British Museum. They walked through the halls of Greek and Roman statues. Dorothy was bored. dragging her feet. But when they entered the Egyptian hall, everything changed. The 3-year-old girl broke away from her mother's hand. She ran towards the massive statues of the pharaohs. She didn't look at them with curiosity. She looked at them with recognition. Witnesses, including museum guards, watched in shock as this little English girl ran to the feet of the statues, kissed them, and sat down cross-legged on the cold floor, whispering, "These are my people. I am home." When her father tried to pull her away, she screamed in a voice that sounded ancient and desperate. "Leave me. Leave me with my people." Later, she found a photograph of the temple of Sety the Rarn at Abydos in a museum guide. She pointed to it and said, "This is my house. But where are the trees? Where is the garden?" Her father laughed. "Dorothy, that is a temple in the desert. There are no gardens there." But Dorothy was adamant. She insisted that she was a priestess named Bentrashit, and that her temple was surrounded by lush green trees. Everyone thought it was a child's fantasy. But 50 years later, archaeologists would dig where she pointed, and they would find the roots of the trees exactly where she said they would be. Dorothy Eady spent the next 20 years preparing to return home. She didn't just dream, she studied. She spent her youth in the British Museum, learning to read hieroglyphs under the tutelage of the legendary Egyptologist E.A. Wallace Budge. Budge was a man of science, but he noticed something unsettling about his student. Dorothy didn't seem to be learning the ancient language. She seemed to be remembering it. She would look at a complex text she had never seen before and read it fluently, as if it were a morning newspaper. When asked how she did it, she simply said, "I'm just relearning my mother tongue." In 1933, Dorothy finally boarded a ship to Egypt. When she stepped off the boat in Port Said, she knelt down and kissed the ground. She was finally back. She moved to the village near the Temple of Abydos. She lived simply, dressing in local clothes, and became known to the locals as Sety, the mother of Sety. But to the scientific community, she was a problem. The archaeologists working at Abydos heard rumors about this eccentric Englishwoman. She claimed to know every secret of the temple. She claimed she had lived there 3,000 years ago as a priestess named Bentrashit. The chief inspector of the antiquities department decided to expose her. He was a rational man. He wanted to prove that Dorothy was just studying old maps and pretending to be a psychic. So, he devised a trap. One night, the inspector invited Dorothy to the temple of Sety the Rarn. He ordered the lights to be extinguished. The temple was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. He led her deep into the complex, to a section that had been excavated only recently. The wall paintings in this corridor had not yet been published. No photographs of them existed in any book, library, or museum in the world. Unless Dorothy had broken into the site secretly, she could not possibly know what was on those walls. Standing in the pitch black, the inspector turned to her and said, "If you truly lived here, tell me what is on this wall. Describe the paintings. Tell me the rituals depicted here." It was a test designed to humiliate her. Dorothy didn't hesitate. In the darkness, she began to walk. She ran her hands lightly over the cold stone reliefs. And then, she began to speak. She described every figure. She named the gods. She recited the hieroglyphic prayers written above them. She described minute details, the position of a hand, the offering in a basket, the color of a robe, things that could not be guessed. The inspector turned on his flashlight. The beam cut through the dust and hit the wall. Dorothy was right. She wasn't just guessing themes. She was describing the wall as if she had painted it herself. She moved to the next panel, and the next. She corrected the inspector on the interpretation of certain symbols, explaining their religious function with a familiarity that unnerved him. By the time they walked out of the temple into the moonlight, the inspector's skepticism was shattered. He realized that this woman possessed a mental blueprint of the temple that defied all logical explanation. But Dorothy had one more prediction to make. A prediction about something buried deep underground. Something that would prove her story once and for all. The darkness test proved that Dorothy Eady knew the temple as it existed in the 20th century. But her most audacious claim was about the temple as it existed 3,000 years ago. She insisted that when she was a priestess named Bentrashit, the temple of Sety was not surrounded by dry, barren sand. She claimed it was surrounded by a lush, magnificent garden. She described tall trees, flowering plants, and wells used for irrigation. She even pointed to a specific area of flat, scorching desert to the north of the temple and said, "The garden was here. I used to meditate under the trees right here." The archaeologists were skeptical. In the 1950s, the consensus was that temples in this specific location were built in the desert environment. No evidence of a garden had ever been found at Abydos. To the scientists, it sounded like a romantic fantasy. A woman dreaming of an oasis that never existed. But Dorothy wouldn't let it go. She pestered the excavation teams. She pointed to the sand and said, "Dig here." Finally, mostly to silence her, the archaeologists agreed to dig at the coordinates she provided. They broke the hard, sun-baked ground. They removed layers of sand and debris that had accumulated over millennia. And then, the shovels hit something different. They uncovered the remains of ancient tree roots, fossilized, petrified roots, preserved in the dry earth. They dug further. They found the layout of garden beds. They found a complex system of ancient irrigation channels. And finally, they found a well. It was exactly where Dorothy said it would be. The layout matched her descriptions perfectly. The scientific community fell silent. You can memorize hieroglyphs from a book. You can study maps in a library. But there was no book in the world that mapped a garden that had been buried under the sand for 3,000 years. Dorothy Eady, the girl who fell down the stairs in London, had just rewritten the archaeological map of Egypt, using nothing but her memory. She lived the rest of her life in Abydos, in a simple mud brick house near the temple. She continued to work as a draftsman for the Department of Antiquities, respected by the very scholars who once doubted her. She died in 1981. She was buried in the desert, facing the west, as the ancient Egyptians did. On her grave, she did not want a Christian cross or a Muslim crescent. She asked simply to be remembered as Sety, the woman who came home. Her case remains one of the most compelling in parapsychology, because it bridges the gap between the mystical and the tangible. She didn't just have a feeling. She gave us coordinates. Our final file takes us to British India. The year is 1930. The place is Delhi. In a narrow, crowded lane of the old city, a 4-year-old girl named Shanti Devi began to worry her parents. Unlike James Leininger, who screamed about plane crashes, Shanti was quiet. Too quiet. She barely spoke until she was 4. But when she finally broke her silence, she didn't talk about toys or sweets. She talked about her real family. At the dinner table, she would push her plate away and say, "In my house in Mathura, we eat different food. My husband liked sweets." Her parents were confused. They had never been to Mathura, a city nearly 100 miles away. They didn't know anyone there, but the strangeness went deeper than geography. It was linguistic. Shanti was born and raised in Delhi, where people spoke Hindi or Urdu. But every now and then, she would use words and phrases in Braj Bhasha, a distinct dialect spoken specifically in the Mathura region. It was as if a Parisian child suddenly started dropping medieval Provençal slang into their sentences. Where could she have learned it? As she grew older, the details became more specific. She claimed her name was actually Lugdi. She said she had died 10 days after giving birth to a son. She described her husband in terrifying detail. He is a cloth merchant. He is fair-skinned. He wears reading glasses. And he has a wart on his left cheek. Her parents tried to hush it up. In 1930s India, a girl claiming to have a husband was a scandal. They thought she was mad. But the story leaked. It reached the ears of the most famous man in India, Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi was intrigued. He invited the child to his ashram. He looked into her eyes and realized she wasn't crazy. He saw a calm, unshakable certainty. Gandhi decided that this case needed to be tested, not by priests, but by skeptics. He appointed a commission of inquiry. This wasn't a group of believers. It consisted of 15 prominent citizens, members of parliament, lawyers, and tough journalists. Their job was to debunk the girl, to prove she was lying. They devised a protocol. They would take Shanti to Mathura, a city she had never visited in this life. They would watch her every move. They would blindfold her mental map. But before they left, the commission laid a trap. They found the man Shanti claimed was her husband, Kedar Nath. They brought him to Delhi, but they didn't introduce him as her husband. They introduced him as the husband's older brother. They wanted to see if the girl would be fooled by the disguise. Shanti walked into the room. She looked at the man. She looked at his clothes. She looked at the wart on his cheek. She lowered her head shyly, as a traditional Hindu wife would, and whispered to her mother, "Why do you introduce him as his brother? Don't you see? This is him. This is my husband." On November 15, 1935, the Commission of Inquiry boarded a train to Mathura. Shanti Devi was sitting by the window. As the train rolled into the station, the Gandhi protocol officially began. The skeptics had a plan. They put Shanti in a horse-drawn carriage. They instructed the driver not to lead the way. Instead, they told the 4-year-old girl, "Take us home." Mathura is a maze of narrow, winding alleys. It is easy for an adult to get lost there, let alone a child from Delhi who had never set foot in the city. But Shanti didn't hesitate. She sat at the front of the carriage, acting like a seasoned navigator. "Turn left here," she commanded. "Now right, past the temple." "Not that way. That is the new road. It wasn't here before." The members of the commission took notes furiously. She wasn't just guessing turns. She was noting urban changes that had happened in the 9 years since her death. She pointed out buildings that had been repainted and shops that had changed owners. When the carriage stopped in front of a house, an old man was standing in the crowd. Shanti jumped down and bowed to him, touching his feet in the traditional sign of respect. "This is my father-in-law," she said. It was true, but the commission needed physical proof, something tangible. Shanti had claimed that in her past life, she had hidden a box of money, 150 rupees, under the floorboards in her bedroom. She said she had saved it for the goddess, and no one, not even her husband, knew about it. The commission led her into the house. They went to the bedroom. Shanti walked to a specific corner of the room. She pointed to a loose floorboard. "Dig here," she said. The tension in the room was palpable. 15 men watched as a worker pried open the floor. Beneath the wood, covered in dust and cobwebs, they found a secret cavity. And inside that cavity was an old jewelry box. The commission members leaned in. If there was money inside, the case was closed. They opened the lid. It was empty. A murmur of disappointment ran through the room. The skeptics smiled. "She is lying," they thought. It was a lucky guess, but the money isn't there. Shanti looked at the empty box, confused. She ran her fingers inside it. "It was here," she whispered. "I left it right here." And then, Kedar Nath, the husband, stepped forward. His face was pale. He looked at the commission, then at the little girl who knew his darkest secret. "She is telling the truth," he said quietly. After Lugdi died, I found the loose floorboard. I found the box, and I took the money. The room fell silent. This was the smoking gun. If Shanti were a fraud, she would have known the box was empty, or she wouldn't have known about the box at all. But she knew exactly where it was hidden, and she expected the money to still be there. Her memory ended exactly at the moment of Lugdi's death. She knew the secret of the dead woman, but she didn't know the secret of the living husband. In their final report, the commission wrote a sentence that is rarely found in government documents. There is no rational explanation for these facts, other than the one the child provides. We have examined 3 files, 3 anomalies in the human operating system. The pilot who knew the engineering flaws of a 1945 fighter plane, the priestess who mapped a garden buried under 3,000 years of sand, and the wife who knew the location of a secret empty box. Skeptics will always try to dismiss these cases. They call it coincidence, fantasy, or fraud. But true investigation requires looking at the data, even when the data makes us uncomfortable. If memory is just chemistry, if it is just neurons firing in a biological brain, then when the brain dies, the memory must be erased. That is the law of physics. But James, Dorothy, and Shanti suggest a violation of that law. They suggest that human consciousness is not like a hard drive that gets destroyed with the computer. It is more like a signal. You can destroy the radio, but the signal remains in the air, waiting for a new receiver to tune in. Perhaps it is not random. James died in a violent crash. Dorothy died young from a fall. Lugdi died in childbirth. In all 3 cases, the life was cut short. The mission was unfinished. The signal was strong. We may never fully understand the mechanics of this transfer. But the evidence forces us to ask a terrifying and beautiful question. If our memories can survive death, what else survives? I am Arthur Vance. These files are now closed, but the archive is infinite.